I used to live a few blocks from here, and we have many connections with NYU, not least that my best friend from kindergarten onward was Bobby Wagner. So the Wagner School is especially close. And this particular group, PACH, I love the idea, and I actually think it's almost a prototype of the world we're moving into. You bring together all the teams, wherever they are, who are working towards a common goal, and then you've got to figure out how to work together. And that's exactly where the world is going, and it is so much more powerful than where we've been. Now, I'd like to start with a story, which I found quite moving in itself, and also because it exemplifies one of the big building blocks that we have to put in place to get where we're going, which is in everyone a Changemaker World. Ashoka has a program called Ashoka's Youth Venture, which is designed to help every young person, 11, 12 through 20, be a change maker, practice it. And when you do that, it's really powerful. So over 80% of the Ashoka Fellows started something in their teens, usually the early teens, and that is not an accident. So ask anyone you know who's an entrepreneur when they first started thing, and watch their eyes when they start talking about it. It's very powerful. So we have about 200,000 young people worldwide who've been engaged in youth venture teams, which is a tiny part of all the children and young people that we need to get to. But these stories are very, very powerful. So we have a gathering every summer, and any youth venture who can get themselves there comes to a different university. So a year ago, it was at Georgetown's Mount Vernon campus. So I went over for lunch and sat down, and there were 3 youth ventures across the table, and one to my left and an empty chair to my right. And this very tiny young woman came over, and I could just feel her power before she sat down. It was just so obvious. But I was also saying, could she possibly be 8 years old? But I've learned you never guess at young people's ages, big mistake. So she very quickly gets everyone on the right page. I'm 12. Okay. So what did you do? What was your venture? Well, my younger brother is autistic. And all through school, I would see kids mistreat him, and I would cry. But now we fixed that. Oh, well, how did you fix that? Well, when we see a special student being mistreated, we get together and we figure out how to intervene, and then we do. And then in the spring, there's Autism Day, which I've never heard of before either. And we sell, blue wristbands, and we put blue light bulbs in the fixtures. And we raise money and awareness. The money goes to autism. This is the woman with the red scarf. This is a year later. As she was talking, if you were there, you would have no doubt, not a second's doubt, that this woman is going to be powerful all her life, that she's never going to be afraid of anything, that she knows how to work with people. She has her power, and there's nothing more important. She can learn anything, she can solve any problem. She's set for a world of change. She's going to be a change maker. And she's brought her team with her. You can see 2 of her team members here. Now, I asked her one other question. How many student groups are there in Shirley Middle School, which is where she is? Over 50. Well, now, you and I know that there are virtually no middle schools that have 50 student groups in them. That's, in this school, 1 per 10 students. So when she went into that middle school, she had a problem. And the culture of the kids there said, you got a problem, you solve it. Build a team. You make it happen. Look around you. This is what the whole culture is about. That's what we do here. And we honor you for it. We'll help you. You can learn how to do it just by observing she moved into an Everyone a Changemaker middle school. And now I'm going to tell you, I happen to know about Shirley because it's an area we've been working for 9 years or so now. There were no student groups in Shirley Middle School. There were no student groups in Leominster High School. This is one of the poorest parts of Massachusetts. It's north central Mass. This is a profound change. She is not from a wealthy middle-class background, but she has her power. Now, what we want, and this is a key building block for the world that we are in, that we now have to recognize, we want every teenager to get their power as early as possible and be practicing it. There is no other way that you can be ready to be a change maker at 21 if you haven't been doing that. And there's a step before that. As young as possible, you've got to master empathy, because without empathy, you can't do treating other people well, listening to other people, let alone teamwork, new leadership, change making, which is what she's practicing here. That's the foundational skill. And that's one of the reasons why what we're talking about here is so important for PACH and its work. So the guy in the middle here, Johnny, started at 14. And as you've probably noticed, school buses are not aerodynamic. Well, he noticed, and he's developed green shields. You see the T-shirts, and they're now producing these things. He just started college up at Columbia, actually. And these shields save per bus $600 to $1,000 a year. He has his power. And this is Sharma, who started, he comes from a criminal tribe. This is one of those great Britishisms. But suffice it to say, the relationships between criminal tribes and police is bad. And that's true even when you move into a slum in Bombay. So he set up a cricket league. And it grew and grew, and you see they've just won an award in a citywide competition here. He's very pleased with that. And he invites the police to come for a social visit afterwards. Sharma has his power. Now, how many middle schools, how many high schools do you know that have an Everyone a Changemaker culture? That is a key building block of this new world. We're going to focus on how can young children master empathy, which is the foundational skill, and how do we make sure that every teenager is practicing being a change maker, empathy, teamwork, new leadership, change making. But for the most important thing I want to do, however, is to try and get the context. Why is this important now? What is the historical tipping point we're going through that makes PACH so important, that makes making these changes absolutely essential, not only for the future of every child and young person, but for America or any other country? And my hope is that to the degree that PACH is able to share a common understanding of the historical moment, the strategic context, it will help make the pieces, the many different pieces in PACH come together, and hopefully we will then be able to work together to make this world, which is a much better world, come faster. So I propose to quickly introduce social entrepreneurship because it's really important for this, and it's also from the leading social entrepreneurs that we're able to understand this historical moment. And they're the key actors, along with everyone here, and Johnny, etc., in making this change. Then mainly go into the historical moment. What is an Everyone a Changemaker world? And what does that mean for everybody? Then how do we actually tip? How can we practically speed up that process and make it come out as intelligently as possible, and then finally come to what it means for everyone here? So let me start with social entrepreneurs. What is the most powerful force in the world? Well, you heard from Aaron, it's a big pattern change idea. but only if it's in the hands of a great entrepreneur. It's that combination, regardless of sector, regardless of time. That's where the new ideas come and fly. So let me introduce you to a few social entrepreneurs, and I'm going to embarrass one who's right here, sitting right there. Mary, if you wouldn't mind standing up. This is Mary. So you'll get a chance to talk with Mary. She is from Toronto. She saw a problem that other people weren't dealing with, that kids were coming and they didn't know how to respond to anyone who made them uncomfortable other with aggression, which invites aggression back, which creates a very bad repeat pattern. And she said, I'm going to change this whole system. And many countries have now picked this up. She's bringing this work to New York City right now, in the Bronx and elsewhere. 2 countries plus Scotland have said, we're into this. So what did Mary do? It had to be simple if you're going to change all these schools. And so she only needs a couple of hours a month for 8 months. Bullying rates come down and stay down. She brings an infant, very young infant at the beginning of the school year, the professor, and the students have the responsibility through a series of exercises of figuring out what is the professor saying, what is the professor feeling. And they're observing the mother-child empathy relationships. Very powerful, very effective. One entrepreneur who took on a big problem that's completely fundamental. You can't get to be effective in a world of change if you don't have this skill. Let me be more specific about that. It used to be, up to the end of the 19th century, that most people could get by in small agricultural static villages just following a set of rules. As the rate of change goes up exponentially, what it is, every year the proportion of your life covered by the rules is going down. And if you don't have empathy-based ethics, you are going to hurt people, you are going to disrupt groups, and you're out. If you hurt me, I don't care how much chemistry you have. I want you out of my life, and it's your fault, and it's your group's fault. And that's going on right now, affecting a very significant part of the world's children. There's nothing more cruel or destructive for them, their families, their community, or their countries. And Mary has made a big contribution to changing that. Jill Violette, California, into play, group play, returning recess. Well, group play happens to be a really good way to practice empathy and teamwork. This is Molly Barker. Some of you probably know of Girls on the Run. Over 100,000 volunteers in the U.S. at the moment. Focus on 5th through 8th grade girls. You know the mean girl problem and grades going down. This is not good empathy moment. So she uses collaborative running after school as a methodology that works really well. Now, these are 3 out of 700 Ashoka Fellows focused on children and young people. These 3 are in the U.S. All 3 of them have work in this area. All 3 of them are helping lead the tipping process I'll come to later. This is Ibrahim Soban from Bangladesh. He puts young people in charge of doing the exercises, grading them, helping the kids who didn't do it right, starting and running for-profit businesses. The kids are in charge, and the results are very dramatic. UN figures show 44% increase in rural enrollments, dropout rate cut in half. Another piece of the puzzle. Every one of these people gave themselves permission to take on something. They found a simple, practical way, and they made it happen. They tipped the system. They changed the pattern. When you put these pieces together, you have something much more powerful. Now, I want to give you one other example, and I'm leaving what we're mainly talking about, children and young people. This is Bright Simon from Ghana. Depending on which survey you look at, somewhere between 25 and 45% of the pharmaceuticals in Africa are fakes. This is a problem if you think about healthcare implications and costs. So he noticed, oh, everyone seems to have a cell phone. What if we could connect barcodes and cell phones and drug companies and telephone companies? Well, yeah, that's what he did. And it's having a very significant effect. So I give you name the problem, you need social entrepreneurs when anything is stuck to figure out how to get it unstuck and how to move the whole society. So these are measures that we've done these for 14 years now. And the purpose of this chart is really to give you a sense. It's not just Mary and Jill and Ibrahim. When you look at this whole group of people, over 3,000 at the moment, over half of them have changed national policy within 5 years of launch. 3/4 have changed the pattern in their field. Now, we only have 1 year of data on that. Corporate Executive Board added that question recently. Roughly 90% have had independent institutions copy their innovation. Now, I want to make a distinction here. These measures all have to do with pattern change. So there are 3 different levels of impact. Direct service. We need teachers in the classroom. That is direct service. We need people to dig wells, to actually go and dig the wells. That is different from what entrepreneurs do. So you measure direct service by how many students did you educate, how many wells did you dig. Totally the wrong measure for entrepreneurs whose purpose is to change the system, to change the pattern. You can't judge Mary on how many students is she directly educating. Crazy measure. But that's what a lot of foundations and regrettably scholars do. And it's very harmful. Now, there's a 3rd level of impact, which is changing the framework of thinking. So the women's movement changed the framework of thinking. Ashoka worked very hard for several decades to introduce the idea of social entrepreneurship, the field. And that is now, not in everyone's heads, but all across the world, many, many people know that there is this possibility. And it opens up new doors for them. Universities all over the world are almost in a panic to cover this field. The business school here has had a program for 5 years. That's not atypical. So what we're talking about today is the biggest pattern change. It's recognizing the most fundamental change that society has gone through. And I'm going to get to that in a moment, but it's very important to have these 3 different levels of impact. Each has a different set of measures. You don't measure the women's movement by direct number of people you serve or specific changes, but changing what's in people's heads. So I grew up working in the civil rights movement. I was privileged to be exposed to the Gandhians in India because the civil rights movement was a Gandhian movement. It never occurred to me that there was anything wrong with how women were treated until the women's movement came along and sort of knocked on the door and said, got to change your framework. Understanding that we're moving into an everyone a Changemaker world, that is the new reality, is a gigantic framework change, and you can't measure it by direct service or pattern change measures. So we'll come back to that. I want to finish up on the importance of social entrepreneurs. When you help a social entrepreneur get started, you're launching an idea, a life, both are going to grow and be more and more powerful. An institution, and because entrepreneurs are different from business, the organizations tend to be smaller, but beyond them there's a movement. Mary doesn't run the thousands and thousands of schools that have taken up her idea. She isn't trying to capture a market and dig a moat. The name of the game is, how do you change the pattern in this field? How do you change how all kids grow up? This is a more powerful model, actually. In the move to an everyone a Changemaker world, the fact that social entrepreneurs succeed by helping local people stand up in their community and say, yes, I believe in Mary's idea. We need that in Winnipeg. we need that in Tokyo. We're going to make it happen here. Well, those people have just become change makers, and Mary has every interest in making them succeed. And so she and every other social entrepreneur is a mass facilitator, a mass recruiter of change makers. And that is a big, very important part of the move to an everyone a change maker revolution. It's another reason that social entrepreneurs are so important. There's a final reason that social entrepreneurs are critical, and they become more critical the faster the world changes. And that is that we used to just assume the basic structures and systems. That world is gone. We can't assume them. They're changing. They're bumping one another. And there are a lot of entrepreneurs who are pursuing the interests of the shareholders, their own interest, a religious or ideological interest. And not that any of them are intending to do evil, but because they're not looking at the whole system can go off the cliff pretty easily. So right now we're losing privacy really fast because we need preventative surveillance, because you can connect all the dots now for almost nothing, and because the dominant business model is give them something, get information, sell the information. These are three independent forces that are absolutely hurting something that is critical for creativity, independence, and much more. So who is going to deal with that? Well, you need the social entrepreneurs. People who, here's the definition, they're entrepreneurs, so they're changing the pattern of society, at least, and from deep within, they're committed to the good of all, and therefore their work is. And so when the system starts heading in the wrong direction, you need the social entrepreneurs to pull it back. We need the social entrepreneurs to work for the environment, for privacy. There are so many of these examples, and we need the social entrepreneurs to be more numerous and more powerful, and that's a major part of what we're building, and I will get to that as well. Now, I want to move to the main focus here, which is, what is this everyone a Changemaker world? It already exists, you can see it. The organizations and the ecosystems that are really successful, what defines them? Well, the new game is what proportion of your people are change makers, at what level of change making, and how good a job are you doing at making your team of change makers a fluid, open team of teams. That's what Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv, Bangalore, and other ecosystems are doing. If you're a change maker, are you going to go to Sioux City or Palo Alto? It's pretty easy. Does America want to be Palo Alto or Detroit? Remember, Detroit was the top of our technology economy and pride 50 years ago, and you know where it is today. Well, we don't have 50 years because the rate of change is going up exponentially. That is the central historical fact. Maybe we have 15 years. This is a very, very fundamental choice for everyone, for every group, for every community, for every country. And I think PACH can make a real contribution here. So now, hang on, I'm going to have to go through a lot quickly, but I think this is actually very clear. We're so far along. So the first point is that there's always been some change going on. When humans Homo sapiens crossed the mouth of the Red Sea, the largest group we could organize was 100 to 150 people. Well, we now have 2 billion person plus countries. We have the World Wide Web. We're a lot better at working together. All through that period, however, up to now, change has been very slow. In the context of a human life or a human organization, you couldn't see it. And when it happened, it would happen a little bit over here, and nothing else changed. Around 1700, business did something incredibly radical. It said, anyone who's got a better idea, you make it happen. We're going to make you happy and rich and respected, and we're going to copy you. That was the beginning of the Everyone a Changemaker revolution. And that's defined the history of the last 300 years. In 1980, when we set up Ashoka, the citizen sector joined that. That's why we've been growing jobs at 2.5 times the rate of the rest of the OECD economy. That's why in the US, I just learned this a few days ago, in the last decade, the number of citizen groups went up by 25%, the number of business groups went up by 0.5%. That curve is really the fundamental fact. The way we have organized up to now was around efficiency and repetition. And we got better and better at it at bigger and bigger scale. So think assembly line law firms. Those are only about 100 years old. The way we organized is a few people choreograph everyone else repeats together in some sort of efficient way. A fits B because they keep doing the same thing. Education was you give people a body of knowledge and a set of rules, and then they repeat that. Baker, banker, whatever it is. Well, you know that world is gone. 40% of the US population are freelancers. Depending on who you listen to, the average American now has 14 to 18 different jobs in their life, and it's just accelerating. And it is accelerating. So this whole structure is falling apart. It just isn't working. Now, why is that? Because as you move up this rate of change, you inhabit a world where the game is not just different, it's the opposite game. So A changes and it bumps B through Z and they bump everyone around them. And soon you're in an environment where everyone is bumping everyone else and change is accelerating and begetting change. Exactly the opposite of the old game. Well, not surprisingly, you have to organize in an almost exactly opposite way. And people have to have a radically different set of skills to play in this game. So you now have a kaleidoscope of where everything is moving and bumping, as versus a few groups that you keep having a repetitive relationship with. The new organization is fluid, no walls, because you have to keep modifying your team of teams to fit the ever-changing reality so that you can contribute in a valuable way. And you have to be open to the best ideas people access wherever they are. The web, obviously, is coming up just in time to serve this. Synapses run omnidirectionally from every point. This is radically different again. Now, in this world, with that type of organization, this type of growing up in education doesn't work. And again, if any young child does not master cognitive, empathy-based ethics, that's the highest level of empathy, they will hurt people and disrupt groups, and that's it for them. You can see that happening all around you. You can see that reflected in the growing prejudice against groups in this country and elsewhere. People who can't play this game, who hurt people, people don't want that. Especially when you think ahead 10 or 15 years, you can't afford to have anyone on your team who can't participate in observing this constantly changing environment and understanding their part of it and figuring out what to do. And they have to figure out how to constantly be living in a team of teams complex that isn't steady. So that's why you need these fundamental skills, cognitive empathy-based, empathy, ethics, teamwork, a very different type of leadership. This leadership is envisage, enable, ensure, not tell people what to do and enforce the rules. And you've got to do this for change. That's why the new paradigm for growing up is every child, this is biologically, kids are ready for this as soon as they finish walking, the sooner the better, learning how to walk. And they've got to master it, thank you, Mary. They've got to practice it, thank you, Molly and Jill and many others. And then when they hit the age of our first heroine here, we want them to start practicing. And that means they've got to be in an everyone a changemaker environment. It also means that all these organizations have to change. I don't have time today to go into that. But I can tell you that I talked to the global managing director at McKinsey a month ago, and he totally got this and said, McKinsey's going to have to change its organization practice, its strategy practice, its people practice, and then, of course, the application of those to finance or whatever. And this is really a fundamental change in the game. This change that we're talking about, this new paradigm for growing up in education, is analogous to the decision that the world made 150 or so years ago. We need everyone to master written language. At that time, that was incredibly radical. You know, the Latin-speaking or Sanskrit-speaking elites that monopolized knowledge and access to God really didn't like this. England burned William Tinsdale at the stake just a few hundred years ago for doing the Bible in English. And so now we're at another big transition. And having a discussion about education reform, which is about access to an obsolete system that serves repetition, isn't helping. Now, one of the nice things about a major framework change like this is we don't have to, and in fact it would be stupid to pretend that we knew how to do it. There are hundreds of ways of doing it because really smart social entrepreneurs and people in the social and emotional learning movement and others have been working at this. There are many answers. No one has ever agreed on how to do literacy education. They've been arguing about it forever, which is a good thing. But there was a framework change, and we agreed that it was essential that every human being had to master written language. This is that sort of fundamental change. Everybody without exception must master cognitive empathy-based ethics, and every teenager has to be practicing, which means that all the middle and high schools have to stop being modeled on factories, which is what they were modeled on, and be modeled everyone a Changemaker World. That's how you learn. I just learned the history of the American high school, which I found depressing but fascinating. The high school was created when we started having factories, and parents said, oh my God, how are we going to get our kids to be ready for this new wonderful future? That's why high schools look like factories. They were designed to. And the South only started having high schools when the factories started appearing in the South around 1920. That is not the heritage we need moving into this world. So contemplate what this world is going to be like. Let's assume we make this transition. We can see large parts of it already. The Jesuits started this in Everyone a Changemaker Island 490 years ago. You talk to anyone who has ever been a Jesuit, they somehow managed to tell you that within 3 to 6 paragraphs of your meeting them. Silicon Valley, you know the companies you really respect, the citizen groups. So it's here. This is going to be a much better world for many reasons. First of all, when everyone is a change maker, think about it, there's no way that the problems can continue outrunning the solutions. Second, it is inherently a much more equal world because everyone is powerful. Everyone has the ability to cause change. And then finally, everyone has the power to give. That's what we have. No one would be here if you didn't have that power. Like the young people I was showing you at the beginning, we're not afraid. But imagine what it's like if you don't have that gift. It's terrifying, and it gets more terrifying every year. So much better world. Think about it the other way. Imagine what it's like if America doesn't make this transition, or India doesn't, or any other part of the world. Well, the divisions will get worse. We can see that happening already. How can America compete with South Africa if South Africa has become an everyone a change maker place and we haven't? All right, so Google can hire everyone a change maker engineers out of the 1 or 2% of the population, but how far into the society does that go if this generation of children and young people don't have these skills? This is a very, very grim picture. And finally, and I think this is what moves me probably more than anything else, it is deeply, deeply cruel to deny any child the ability to be a part of society, a contributing, respected, loving and loved part of society, someone who can express love and respect in action, is the worst possible thing you can do to anybody. And we are doing that right now to millions and millions of children in this country and around the world because we don't see this yet. Mary's solution does not take a huge amount of money, but it requires a framework change. All right, so now let me illustrate something that's very new. How do we actually tip the system? So Ashoka, over the last 10 and mainly the last 7 or 8 years, has learned something new called collaborative entrepreneurship. Up to now, entrepreneurs have been solo practitioners. When you bring together, you only saw 4 or 5 stories here, bring together 700. And of course you can see the patterns. And from the patterns, which are about the present, you can figure out, okay, here's where this field is going, especially when you understand the overall architecture of an everyone a change maker world. Every child must master empathy, and every teenager better be practicing being a change maker. And you know what the measure is. What proportion of 21-year-olds know they're change makers before they're 21? How do we get there? We know what the new paradigm is. The final step before action is something we call the jujitsu step. How the entrepreneur is always a very small force. In this country, there are 80,000 elementary schools. There's no way on earth, even if all of us worked together full-time, that we could deal with 80,000 elementary schools. Not to mention all the middle and high schools and the fact that the US is a rather old population with 4% of the world's population. So it's completely unpractical. So instead, the question is, what are the least number of forces that we need to set in motion that then become a self-multiplying dynamic and then draw in other forces? And so for the US, to tip the world, we think there are basically 10 places you've got to get, of which the US is one. So we said, if we can get 60 schools that are representative of all the different types of kids, neighborhoods, types of schools, and we can get 30 writers, publishers, who totally get the everyone a change maker thing. They know America can't succeed if we don't make this transition. And we have fellows like Mary, Jill, Molly, working together. 91 teams. That's manageable. We already see this at work. Univision, Maria Hinojosa, just to take people focused on the Hispanic community in this country, that's 1 out of 4 kindergartners, to put this in perspective. Those 2 forces see this. Then you have schools that have Hispanic kids and parents and teachers, and you bring the 2 together. The writers have the story, the school has the megaphone, the fellows help both. Right, that dynamic has already started, and it's very powerful. So we never imagined this. We had 2 and then 3, and now we're headed towards 8 graduate schools of education who see this as the new strategic frontier, and they want to be there. We have one of the largest consulting firms, not McKinsey, I'm sad to say, who is investing millions of dollars in developing a new practice to help companies know how to hire for these people, and then once they're in, how do you continuously develop these skills? So the tipping process is beginning. And one of the major challenges that I want to put to PACH is how can we work together to speed up this tipping process? The levers are there. If we work together as a team of teams, we can really make a big difference here. Now, conclusion. The foundational skill of this world is empathy-based ethics. You can't play in this world if you don't have that skill. That goes right to the heart of what PACH focuses on. It's the right focus. We have to get that across to every parent, every teacher. We've got to change the system all the way through. You can't have an Everyone a Changemaker company unless you have everyone there having mastered empathy-based ethics, therefore teamwork, therefore the new leadership and change-making. You can't succeed if you don't have that workforce. Well, how do you organize to make that happen? I'm now touching about almost every part of everyone's life here. Everyone here cares about some child, some young person. Everyone here belongs to some group, the university, a religious group, a citizen group, a business, or you will. Are you going to help that institution make this transition, or will you let it die? Because it doesn't see the change. Do you know people who are writers? I'm sure you do. Can you help them see it so they can do a better job of getting this frame change across to the people they're serving? It is so liberating when you see it, you understand, okay, this is where the world is going. Now I know how to be a better parent or leader or whatever. So what we want, I think all of us, is a world where everyone is like the young woman I met at the Ashoka Youth Venture Summit. She is from a poor family in a poor neighborhood. This would never have happened. It has happened. She is going to be a wonderful contributor all her life. Now, how do we make sure that this is truly an everyone? And I don't mean everyone in our 1%, but everyone, it's a very radical idea, a change maker, a really powerful person able to express love and respect in action. We have to do that. And I want to thank everyone here again for working on it. Thank you.
Okay, so there's about 10 minutes for questions. Bill, I'm going to start off with a question to get the conversation going. Could you talk to us a little bit more about what you mean by empathy-based ethics and the expressions of it so we get a clearer sense of what you're referring to? Because that certainly is a part of what PACH is, but I want to hear more from you about how you see it.
Well, if I could pick up on a conversation we had a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
The great religious prophets came at a time when we had the first little towns, Jericho, in India, Pataliputra, which was not so little. And in those places, rules-based ethics didn't cover all circumstances. There were a little change going on, and when you are in a situation of change and there are no rules, you have to have the ability to judge the impact your possible action is going to have on all the people around you. And then you have to make a judgment. You can't rely on rules that aren't there or in conflict. And the prophets had to talk in parables because most people didn't need it and didn't want it. Now, we live at a moment in time that really came around 1900. At that point, 97% of the world's people were growing up in small, isolated, static agricultural villages, and they didn't need this. The world changed very quickly after that. And now everyone has to have the ability to judge the people around them and guide their behavior. And so I'll now give you a more technical description of what this means. You have to observe yourself, understanding all the people around you, layers out, further and further into the future as the future comes at you faster and faster. And now not in 3 contexts that are stable over a person's life: their work, their religious house, their family, maybe 4. But now it's this kaleidoscope of constantly changing, interconnected contexts. This is very complicated. We're all born with cerebral cortexes and neurons, so we can do I feel your pain empathy. Elephants do that. This is a learned set of skills, just as literacy in written language is a learned set of skills. We all have the biological ability to do it, but we have to help people master these skills. And that's why Mary's contribution is so completely critical. And to begin with, we have to know it's important. Now, I can tell you from talking to many groups of parents, employees in companies who are parents, grandparents, once a parent understands this is where the world is going, and when people think about it, this really is just a description of reality that's there. Giving people words is really important. Oh, that's what's going on. Then they think about what's going to happen to their daughter, 6-year-old, if she doesn't master empathy. And you explain, she's going to hurt people. She's gone. Parents don't want that. And then you show what they can do, the parents can do. The 6-year-old hits the 4-year-old. Well, you've got rules and punishment. Okay, that's the old system. But you can also put your arm around your daughter and have a very serious, loving conversation as an educational moment. How do you think your brother felt when you did that? Or if it's the 15-year-old who says something's a mess, put your speech down or cooking or whatever it is. This is one of those great moments when you can encourage your son or daughter or goddaughter, well, why don't you figure out a solution? And why don't you get your friends together and do it? Who, me? Yeah, you can do this, and here's why this is important. And ultimately, we want every school, every youth culture, every neighborhood to be doing this, so everyone's in this game. But parents, once they understand this, they want to do it. And this is not that hard. Mary's approach is not that hard. But you've got to know it's important. And so it's several steps beyond I feel your pain. It's beyond the Sermon on the Mount. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That assumes everyone is pretty much the same. This is a higher level of empathy that's required in the world of very fast and accelerating change and rich complexity. Does that do it?
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you for speaking and sharing your thoughts. And I was curious about showing empathy to those who are incapable or have a very difficult time experiencing empathy.
That's a really good question, and I bet you there are many people here who can answer that better than I. And I'm looking at Mary because to begin with, I have to admit that I know in theory that there are people who are supposed to be psychopaths or whatever, but in the normal course of life, I don't think I've ever met anyone who isn't able to respond. And you know the problem of traumatized children. Well, you know what to do. Mary, why don't you answer this? You'll do much better than I.
So was the question, what do you do when you're showing empathy to someone who doesn't have the capacity to show empathy back? Yeah, empathy is something that develops experientially. There's no flashcard, there's no course, there's no quick fix. It's the only way to develop empathy is what you're talking about, so that it may not happen immediately, but when we show empathy towards someone, what we're basically saying is that I feel the same thing that you're feeling, and that can be shocking for someone who's never experienced empathy, but I would be very patient and not give up and not be critical. Empathy is something that's innate. It either blooms or fades, metaphorically at the breast. If you did not get it in the early years, you can still develop it from people like you who take the time to try and be empathic to somebody else. Okay?
Hi, my name is Frank Fredericks. I was actually a Youth Venture awardee like 7 years ago, and I'm currently in the process for the Ashoka Fellowship, so happy to be here.
Oh, this is a double bill.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it all goes. One thing that I've been really fascinated by is watching Ashoka and the Empathy Project, or initiative, excuse me. And with it, these metrics make a lot of sense to me. I guess I'm more of a literal person, and so moving into this chaotic world, this is a really great way to see and measure pattern change. One thing we've been struggling with at my organization, we talk about measuring humanization and changing opinions of others. But I feel like that's a lot more shallow than empathy. So I'm just curious, at Ashoka, how are you measuring empathy and how effective this is?
Boy, these are really good questions. We are wrestling with this. For staff, we have, is this person a proven entrepreneur? And then listen to all the other ones that follow. Do they intuitively get, and believe the everyone a Changemaker World? You can't have a basketball team unless everyone believes in getting the ball in the basket. So that's key about self-permission, definition. Are you able to comfortably play in a big game? And are we in the same game? Next, 3, social and emotional intelligence. And 4th is exceptional ethical fiber, which has always been one of our 4 criteria for staff fellows, everything else we do. And for that, you have to appeal beyond the cerebral cortex. You have to get to the basic, developed over many, many, many years, ability that we all have. And we have some very interesting tests for that. If we have time, we can go into. And then finally, the ability to communicate in high concept English. We simply have to have a common language. So 4 out of the 5 criteria go to, are these people who really can work together? And so the collegial / entrepreneur and the integrated / organization, those are 2 sides of the same coin, have always been the short language for how we define, even before we got started, what's important. Then when you think about this everyone a Changemaker World, it's just, we're much clearer about it, obviously, than we were even 5 or 10 years ago. The fundamental skill is empathy-based ethics. You can't do any of the rest of it if you don't have it. And put another way, this is such a better world because everyone will have a higher and higher level of empathy-based ethics. It's not going to be a relative minority of good entrepreneurs who are driven by the good of all, but we'll all be driven by the good of all. And that's rewarded at every step. At the moment, we're still in rules and fears and all the bureaucracies and stovepipes. It's a mess. Especially it's a mess because before you articulate and explain, okay, this is where we're going and this is a much better place. So we have to make our way through this transition. And that's why I think PACH is so important again. This is a group of people who have self-selected. We are going to do something about this across all the stovepipes. Once we get to that world, think about it. This is such a better place. We can count on everyone else being driven by a very high level of cognitive empathy-based ethics, and we'll all get better and better at it. And it's sort of like squash or tennis. If you play with people who are good, you get better. And if everyone around you is good, and if the companies and one of the characteristics of this world is there is never going to be another plateau. You can't just learn the level of empathy-based ethics needed for today. You have to constantly help everyone get better and better at it. because that's what's going to be required. Well, that's a dynamic that I think that's pretty good. Please give us that dynamic fast.
I'm Priscilla, and thank you again for the talk. This is really more of a conversation-based question. I'm really fascinated by how mindfulness can play a role in building empathy and self-awareness. And so I'm wondering where you see that movement in the education system for youth, starting from kindergarten all the way up.
Mary?
Thank you. Well, maybe if I take a stab at saying what we mean by mindfulness, and you can tell me if I'm channeling you or not. Mindfulness simply being self-awareness. Fair? Yes, there is a movement to help children be self-aware, and in order to be empathic, you must have self-empathy in order to have empathy for others. And if you're not aware of your own feelings, it's impossible to be aware of other people's feelings. So the two aspects of empathy, cognition, is perspective taking. And that is really a cognitive activity. And the other is the affective side, and that's emotion. And I think the mindfulness movement is more about the affective side of empathy. How are you feeling? Follow your breathing. And I'm not talking about the 70s fall back and I'll catch you ridiculous movement. I'm just talking about how does one have a sense of where you are at the moment in your feelings, not so much in your thinking. But to have empathy, you must marry up the two. There are many car salesmen who have very good perspective-taking skills, but will rip you off. To have the affective side of empathy, you're less likely to hurt others, as Bill is talking about, because you understand how they will feel if you do that.
I'll add to that. So as a dedicated, I guess, Buddhist, the essence of a practice is basically cultivating empathy for yourself and for other sentient beings in the world. So I think mindfulness is a sort of like a transformation of a Western interpretation of the specific Eastern philosophical thinkings. And have you, PACH or Ashoka, been thinking about integrating those kind of Eastern practice into your own intervention? Or
Yes. This is one of the strange things about the three Abrahamic religions. They are very human-focused, and they just cut everything else out. There was the Ark and the Garden of Eden, but basically it's very human-oriented. And South Asia, all the South Asian religions take a universal view. You want to become one with the universe, not just with people. We don't make the distinction. And children don't make that distinction. And I personally spend time backpacking, and it's so obvious that it's a false distinction. That's my personal judgment. So part of what I think we have to do, just practically, is we need to be responsible for and feel one with the whole universe. And we're in some rather serious trouble right now because we're not. That's my personal point of view. But Ashoka, one of the other things Ashoka, the person of 2,300 years ago, he very much believed in being one with the universe. And that is one of the wonderful qualities he brought. And if you are one with the whole of being, then you're actually much more likely to be one with people as well.